The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Now broadcasting from the Right to Offend Media Studios in sunny South Florida, bringing you the latest in politics, current events, art, and pop culture. This is the Whitfield Report Live with Sam Whitfield.
But giving offense is good. In fact, it's essential.
Hey there, folks. Happy November and welcome to today's Monday edition of the Whitfield Report. And joining me today is Lisa Ekman, a author and a former DNC insider, which I find very interesting. Lisa actually reached out to me to promote her new book, Deprogramming Democrats, and well, I found the opportunity very intriguing, so I'm very excited and quite frankly honored to talk to Lisa. So welcome to the show. Lisa, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Sam. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
My pleasure. So I guess my first question starting out is, what is your general background? How did you get started in politics? What was kind of interested in getting into politics?
Sure. So I actually was in Washington, D.C. for a little over 20 years, working in a variety of different positions and for different federal agencies, the Senate, and nonprofits and government contractors. And I moved there in 1999 after I had finished my master's in social work degree. And I got nominated by the dean of my social work program to a program called the Presidential Management Internship Program. You know, I had gone to social work school because I thought I wanted to work directly with clients. And I learned that I wasn't really able to balance my own mental health if I was working directly with other people who were facing significant challenges. So I decided to get into policy, and then got nominated for this program and moved to Washington, D.C. to work directly for an appointee in the Clinton administration at the very tail end of President Clinton's second term. And then ended up doing that. My family was very liberal. My parents were very liberal. I joke that they were hippies who did not do drugs, because that's really what they were. Although some people would say that's an oxymoron. You can't be a hippie who doesn't do drugs, but that was my parents. And, you know, they really raised me to be a very aware person of what was going on politically in the country. You know, they were what I would call classical liberals or JFK Democrats. They really believed in our Constitution. They were patriotic, and they instilled those values in me. And, you know, I went to Washington because I really wanted to make our country better. I focused on disability policy while I was in Washington, D.C., trying to improve our government programs for people with disabilities. And I worked with and on their behalf throughout my 20 years in Washington. And so I also, while I was in Washington, went back to law school and got my law degree. And I consider myself a recovering attorney. I don't practice anymore, but, you know, you can't really take the lawyer out of the person once you put the lawyer in there. So, but that's sort of how I got started. And, you know, I worked for a couple of different United States senators. I worked for Ted Kennedy, Tom Harkin of Iowa. I used to joke around that I bled blue and that, you know, vote blue no matter who. I was really a pretty hardcore Democrat. But during the time that I was in D.C., Sam, D.C. changed. And the Democratic Party changed a lot from the time, especially when I was a kid. But throughout the 21st century, the Democratic Party hardly resembles what it was prior to that. And I'm sure we can talk a lot more about what that was and how it happened. But that's sort of my background. I was the president of the Georgetown Law Democrats when I was in law school, just to give everyone a flavor. I was very much a pretty hardcore Democrat, and I volunteered at Obama's national headquarters for his first campaign, doing disability voter outreach. So yeah, it gives you a good sense of how involved it was.
Yeah, and that's actually very interesting because, I myself have a physical disability. I was born with cerebral palsy, but like I've always been, I wouldn't say, I mean, I would say I'm pretty conservative, but I would say I'm more like a conservative libertarian hybrid. And I think always surprises people, especially on the left, when they find that, someone with a disability is more conservative. I think one of the things I've noticed is that the left, when I started podcasting, which was way back in like 2008, there were more liberals who wanted to have conversations and dialogues. But now it seems like there's a strain of the left that's kind of taken over, that they don't want to have a dialogue unless you absolutely agree with them. And to an extent, it's even pushed, a fair amount of, I guess, classical liberals like yourself away or further to the right, I guess. So I'm curious, when did you feel that the party started to change? Do
Yeah,
you
so there's a couple of things that I could point to, and I think the first thing, it was a pretty slow process. It didn't happen overnight. It
Right.
started, I would say, by political correctness, and that probably really started late 80s, but it wasn't that big of a deal back then. So you could have conversations, but people started to tell you that if you use certain words or talked about things in certain ways, that it wasn't very nice. But
Right.
if you did that, there was no cancel culture, there was no consequence other than stop being mean. But it slowly picked up steam and slowly picked up steam. And I think really when it really started to shift was around five. I think social media played a huge role in this, because what it did is took everybody's political life public in a way that it never had been before. Prior to the internet and social media, you might not even know if your neighbor was a Democrat or a Republican. Did they bring
Right.
a good dish to the block party, or were they nice people? But once everybody started posting everything about themselves, including their politics, it became more and more important. And then there became the ability to sort of police people in terms of, oh my goodness, did you see what someone said on social media? What a bad person. And then we started seeing the rise of cancel culture. And then I think that the combine that with the election of President Obama the first time, because I think that, like I said, I worked for his campaign, his first campaign, and I was kind of excited about him actually. But then I really do think that he did not work to unify us as a country. He worked to divide us. He made he started I started seeing people on the left really begin to believe that they had a moral superiority to people who did not believe like them, and then
Yeah.
that they had the right to then cancel you if you didn't.
And can I ask this? Did you did you feel that way did you feel that way in the first term, or was this kind of something that you kind of looked at in hindsight? Because from my perspective, like even as a conservative like teenager at the time in 2008, I remember kind of feeling like, okay, well, I didn't, you know, I might not necessarily agree with Obama politically, but the fact that he is, the first African American president, I really do hope that this can be, I hope I'm wrong, kind of about, what Rush Limbaugh and a few of the others were saying, I really hope that he can unite us. Seems like to me, really in the second Obama term was really when the division started to kind of rear its ugly head. And I've talked to some friends from high school who are African American. They were young black men who really loved Obama the first term around. And then just like last year, I reconnected with a friend who he used to be a big Obama fan, but then when we got to voting age around 21, he voted for Trump. And I asked him why, and he said, well, because Obama sold us on unity, and as a young black man, that was really inspiring. But it felt like he actually divided us further. And I felt that I found that very interesting coming from, a young black man at the time.
Yeah, I would say that it's only in hindsight, Sam, that I realized this. I went along, with most everything that I was being asked to go along with in what I call now the need for ideological conformity on the left, meaning that they don't even want to talk to you if you aren't going to what they already believe to be true.
Yeah.
I went along with it for quite a while, and I think that there were a couple of things that started to sort of make me ask some questions. And the first one was luckily, none of my employers directly ever made me do this because I don't know how I would have reacted. But as I started to see everybody being almost forced to put their pronouns in their email signatures, that sort of made me ask some questions. And then, I have always maybe differed a little bit with the left on my views on immigration. But as I started to see them sort of completely almost support open borders for anybody who wanted to come in, that was kind of going a little bit too far for me as well. But
Yeah.
I think, as I look back, um, I was very indoctrinated and brainwashed myself into what I call the progressive cult. And so I didn't see it at the time, but looking back on it, I can remember how things sort of changed. I'll say this, there will be people who disagree with me about this, Sam, but especially by the 90s and probably the late 80s, I feel like we were reaching a much better place when it comes to race relations in this country. It wasn't that we didn't see color, it's just that it really didn't matter to us in many instances. Like, I didn't care what color you were, what party you voted for, what church you went to, but were you a good person? Did you treat me well? Did we have
Yeah.
enjoy each other's company? And I really saw that change during Obama.
Yeah, I grew up in the 90s and into, 2000s. That was kind of when I was, a kid. And I remember like I had and still have, black friends, Hispanic friends, and it was never really something that we, talked about other than, there was historical injustice in the past, and obviously that needed to be remedied. But it was more like people just bonded over like common interests. And if you brought up things like, well, we need to talk about race, in today's context, it was kind of like, well, why? That's kind of awkward. It was kind of off-putting for everyone. And then around the time I got to college in 15, 2016, then it became almost like a, well, we need to talk about race, and all of these differences all the time. And if you don't want to talk at them, you're the racist, even if you're, a well-meaning liberal. And I found that to be very interesting as well, being in my, 20s at the time.
Yeah, that lines up perfectly with what I remember, Sam, and kind of how it evolved. And I think that one of the chapters in my book is about education, and I call it's one of the tools of control. And we saw sort of, I would say, very far left radical professors taking over a lot of our higher educational institutions. And what they believe in is critical theory, which
Right.
is deconstruction, destruction of institutions. Critical race theory flowed from that tradition. Over 90% of professors are Democrats, and 95 of their percent of their donations go to the Democratic Party. That's going to vary by major, by field. Some of your STEM and harder sciences are going to have lower percentages of Democrats, but you're probably pushing 100% in a lot of these sort of social justice or social science type fields of study. And so they really pushed, I think, that narrative that there are oppressors and there are the oppressed, and we have to rectify these historical wrongs, despite having, perhaps one could argue pretty convincingly, I think, achieved legal equality in this country, despite some institutions still needing, some help around racism. And I would not be anyone to say that there is no racism in this country. There still is. However,
Right.
not to the extent that you would think if you were sitting in a college classroom.
So, kind of regarding that though, kind of my view, and this isn't really me speaking as a conservative, this is just me kind of observing things. I'm not in college anymore, but I remember when I was in college, I remember at one point I thought, all this talk about racism is actually taking us back because we're actually hyper focusing on that. A white kid can't even listen to rap or, hip hop anymore without, becoming a big, discussion about, cultural appropriation or something. And that was really weird because it was if you ask someone, well, what type of music would you like? Do you like? It would be, oh, I like this, that, and the other thing. And that would be the start of a conversation. But then if I were to say something like in 2016 that I like, hip hop or I like jazz, oh, well, you're a white person culturally appropriating, you know, something. And that, that's a conversation that most people are not prepared to have if you're just making casual conversation.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that sort of has happened is that, well, there's two things I think that have happened. One is that there has been a concerted effort to remove intent from mattering when it comes to issues around any kind of sort of discrimination, racism, homophobia, transphobia, all those things. Meaning, so if you look at the concept of microaggressions, for example,
Yeah.
um, it completely, this is an example I give in the book because they talk about this a lot in the book, and I believe that education is, our education system is where this has happened a lot, is that you could ask the most innocent question, and if the person you ask it to takes it the wrong way, then it's considered a microaggression. I use this example. You show up at
Yeah.
school, you're brand new, and you ask someone, hey, where are you from? And really all you mean is, are you East Coast, West Coast? Did you grow up in the South? What's your background? But it could be taken to mean like, are you even from this country? But that isn't your intent. And when you remove intent from that equation, you are destroying objective reality. You're destroying the idea that there is a reality that exists that we could agree to, and then the people who get to define what words you can use get to define and control you. And so I think that's a part of it,
Yeah.
and it encourages people of color or people of whatever quote unquote historically oppressed or vulnerable group to look for racism everywhere or homophobia everywhere or whatever discrimination in question, as opposed to and to look for our differences rather than looking for the things that we have in common.
Yeah. So, to kind of move into the heart of the conversation, I guess. At what point did you really shift over? I don't even want to say at what point did you become conservative, because I don't want to, really assume that that's what you've done fully. But what was the turning point specifically that you became disaffected with the left? Was there any event in particular that kind of caused this transformation? And also, do you feel like you've changed, or do you feel like you've stayed the same and the party has changed radically? Or
All right. Yeah, let me take the second one first, and then I'll go back to
sure,
the event. But I believe that the party has changed significantly. I believe it's been pushed way farther to the left than it used to be, and I believe that it used to be inclusive uh, to ideas, and it is no longer that. It used to be we could agree to disagree about some things, but in general, we support certain primarily social things and potentially ideas about, government potentially being able to solve some of our problems. But we may disagree about exactly how to get there or what that means. And I don't think
yeah,
the party is that anymore. Like many people, like high profile people who have left the Democratic Party recently, I would say that I didn't leave the party, it left me. And then just to clarify, I don't consider myself a Republican. I don't consider myself a Democrat. I'm an independent. I'm going to vote for whatever candidate I think can win who will respect our Constitution and enact policies in that are consistent with those principles. Because at its base, we can either be a constitutional republic founded on individual liberty, or we can be a communal democracy that is not founded on that. And I'm going to vote for the person who's going to keep us a constitutional republic based on individual liberty. So, your first question is, was there a specific thing that woke me up? And I say woke me up because I was programmed and asleep to reality.
sure,
And yes, there was. It was really during COVID, but I have to tell a little brief story about something that happened before that put me in a position to see through the COVID lies that we were told. I sadly lost both of my parents a few years before COVID. My father died in 2014 and my mom in 2016. And so I had a lot of interaction with what I would call our sick care system in this country as opposed to our healthcare system. And, my dad had a surgery for a back issue and then had some catastrophic complications. He became functionally quadriplegic and in adrenal failure. And my mom became his primary caregiver, and she already had multiple sclerosis at the time that this happened. And my dad lived for 5 years after that happened. It was really hard. He needed help with every activity, but he wanted to be alive and he fought really hard, and he had some great quality of life during those 5 years. While she was caring for him, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 of a really aggressive cancer and was given the get your affairs in order speech. You may only have a few years or a few months to live. And so she came to me and she said, Lisa, I want to live. I'm going to do traditional treatment, but if there's anything else I can do that will help improve my odds, I want to do it. And so, as someone who did disability policy, I did a lot of research around healthcare and health. I worked on healthcare policy to try to improve access and services and supports for people with disabilities. And I worked with all these agencies. So I said, sure, Mom, I'll do the research. So I started doing the research, and I found a couple of books and other studies that really gave us some light and hope. And so, we got my mom to a naturopath. We changed her entire diet. We changed everything she put in and on her body, everything she cleaned her home with. And we worked at addressing how she dealt with stress, because stress is really damaging to your immune system. And what you need is a really strong immune system when you're battling cancer. So we did that, and we did guided meditation, focused breathing, all sorts of things. And so she did all these things, and she had surgery to remove the tumors in the primary site. And she started a round of chemo, which was 6 treatments. And by the time she had her 3rd treatment, she was completely cancer free. Her cancer marker was in the normal range. She had nothing on her scans, and her doctor was flabbergasted. Couldn't believe it. It's a
Wow.
miracle. Never seen this happen with this cancer. You're a miracle. You're a warrior. Great job. At the same time, he told her to eat whatever she wanted, and kind of poo-pooed all of these things that we believe helped get her that result. It certainly wasn't this toxic chemo that usually he had told her to expect several rounds of 6 treatments before it might go away. So my mom had 2 years completely cancer free. And then they found a tiny little growth in where her original tumor site was, and suggested immediately to start chemotherapy again. My mom had 1 chemotherapy treatment, and it fried her kidneys, and she passed away about a month later due to kidney failure from the chemotherapy.
Ooh.
Yeah, so that was really hard. We were really grateful for the 2 years that she got. I should say that she did have some indications that the first round of chemo, because she did finish all 6 treatments, even though there was no evidence of cancer after 3, had affected her kidney function. So she was already knew her kidney function was affected, but her doctor believed that this cancer was so aggressive that he couldn't not treat it with this really toxic platinum-based chemotherapy. That was the hardest thing that ever happened to me, was lose both my parents that way, Sam. But what it also did was start really raising a lot of questions to me about our healthcare system. About, the studies that I found, the data that is out there is pretty clear that things like what you eat will affect your ability to beat cancer. One of the things that is
Yeah.
really clear is that sugar feeds cancer. We eat a ton of sugar in this country, and almost quite literally eat a ton by the time you're in your lifetime. But yet these are not things that any doctor that you might, any regular, there are some doctors, but most doctors won't talk to you about your diet when you're getting cancer treatment. And a lot of the things that I learned during this research really didn't square up with what our regulatory agencies tell us about health. And so it raised some cracks in my mind about, the agencies I worked with, whether the USDA food pyramid made any sense, and who are these agencies really working for? Are they really protecting our health, or are they representing the corporate interests of the people who sell products?
Yeah. I'll tell you, and I don't want to get too much off into this topic unless you're comfortable with it, but the thing that was really kind of weird for me was this whole thing with the transgender ideology, and not even so much like with adults um and whatnot. I'm kind of more libertarian on that. Like, if you want to be, if you're a consenting adult and you want to be transgender or whatever, and you know what you're getting into, more power to you. But the thing that has baffled me is how many of these um proponents on the left are not only okay with giving hormones to children, but are actually actively encouraging it. And that, there's this whole thing of, gender dysphoria and whatnot, which from what I've read, because I read a lot of, alternative health things too, it all seems to be tied together with, like, hormone and imbalances. And rather than seeking, natural treatments, seems like, some of these people want to just do the most radical thing. some of them may be well-intentioned, but it seems like a lot of them don't have good intentions because it just feeds into their ideological narrative. What's kind of your take on that, if I might ask?
Sure. So I spend a good deal of time in the book talking about gender ideology, and um, there's a lot of things sort of to unpack in your question. The first thing that I will say is that one of the things that if you are a revolutionary, communist, a socialist, you want to destroy the system, what there are two things primarily that you want to do. You want to destroy the family and you want to destroy any connection to religion. And part of destroying the family is destroying gender roles. And you see that with feminism, and that's a whole other topic we can maybe not go into today, but we can if you want to. But you destroy the very idea of gender itself. And again, it gets back to what I talked about before a little bit of destroying objective reality. There is no reality. There is no such thing as woman anymore. There is no such thing as man anymore. And it becomes easier to control people. So, my point in bringing that up is that this didn't come out of nowhere. It's been a concerted effort to actually make us so confused about some of these things that we have a sitting Supreme Court justice who, in her confirmation hearing, when asked the question, "What is a woman?" said, "I'm not a biologist." That's how far this has gone. So, and it's on purpose. But I agree with you. To me, there are two things going on with young people. I'm with you. If you are an adult, dress however you want, take whatever pills you want, have whatever cosmetic surgery you want. I'm not going to try to stop you from doing that. I will not participate in your delusion that you can change sexes, and the Constitution guarantees my right not to do that, I believe, under the First Amendment. I also don't think I ought to be paying for it. If you want to do it, go
Right.
ahead. Um, and do that. But with children, there are a couple of things going on. The first one is that I agree with you. We have all these endocrine and hormone disruptors, and there are chemical things going on with children that may be contributing to this. But I do also believe very strongly in what many people call the social contagion model of gender ideology. And that is that, if you take a small child who's 5 or 6 years old and you tell them over and over again that they're a dinosaur, they will believe you. If you take a 5 or 6 year old child and tell them over and over again that they can be any gender they want, they will believe you. And I think that have a very severe mental health crisis going on in our country, our culture, and maybe in the world. I can't speak to what's going on in other parts of the world, but here. And we have the ability to be extremely connected, like you and I are right now, but everyone is very disconnected in real life compared to when I was younger. So we have kids whose parents don't have time for them in many cases, and that's an economic reality, sadly, that many families face, especially if it's a single parent household. And the vast majority of single parent households are mom. So mom is working all the time. Mom can't give you the attention that you need, so you start looking for it online. And one of the first things that you find is a community and wants to be, you to be a member and will just sing your praises provided that you believe you're in the wrong body. So what happens is that, this is especially the case with young girls who become, try to transition to be men. And there are quite a few detransitioners who have told this exact story, that they felt alone, they felt isolated, they felt that they didn't fit anywhere. And then they went online and they found this transgender community who welcomed them in, provided they said that they were a part of it.
Right.
And so the other thing that this whole thing attempts to do is make school a safe place and your family not a safe place. It's to divide you to be trusting of authority and untrusting of your family. So, the schools in certain districts will socially transition kids, change their names, their pronouns, how they let them dress, however, without ever telling the parents. And so this is also uh, a very clear, again, trying to destroy the family, separate you from um, your your family, and to look to authority and the government to be safe, which is part of the overarching strategy. I think there are a couple of things going on with parents who, go along with this, Sam. And I think a big part of it is that there are two things. One is that all the experts tell you that if you don't transition your child, they'll probably try to kill themselves, right?
Yeah.
And there is on the left, and this is what I call it, sort of a cult-like devotion or almost religious faith. So they worship authority and they idolize the expert. So if all the experts tell you this is the best thing that you can do for your kid, and if you don't do it, your kid might kill themselves, then you're going to comply and go along with it, even though it doesn't make any sense. There is no other situation, like up until very recently, the belief that you were born in the wrong sex body was a defined mental illness in the DSM, the
Yeah.
Diagnostic Manual, gender dysphoria. There is no other mental illness that we would go along with the delusions of someone suffering from that mental illness to the point that we would allow them to mutilate their body irreversibly and take drugs that often the effects of cannot be reversed. So the first thing is that they trust the experts, even though the experts in the case of transgender and gender ideology are not actually medical experts. That's a whole other story. WPATH is an advocacy organization that has created all of the standard of care and everything, and it is not scientifically based. I looked into this when writing the book. But the other part of it is that if you do not go along with the gender ideology, you will be canceled. You have to do it. And most people on the left rely on external validation for a sense of self. So they can't really take a position that would put them at odds with the rest of the people on the left. And it's that need for ideological conformity that I was talking about earlier that creates a lot of this. So there's another thing that sort of has happened on the left. By and large, people on the left are very compassionate, even
Sure.
though it doesn't seem like it, when you have a conversation with them now. And this is why. That compassion has been manipulated, and it's been made selective. So they only have compassion now for who's deserving of that compassion, meaning if you're historically oppressed or you're vulnerable, I will be compassionate towards you. And anyone who doesn't agree with them about how those people should be treated is now that manipulated compassion gets weaponized into anger.
Yeah.
So if you don't care about these poor trans children, then I will get angry at you and you deserve to be canceled, and I can call you all sorts of names because you don't care about these poor, oppressed, or vulnerable kids.
Right.
All of that, I think, combines together. So the experts tell them, have to affirm your child or they may kill themselves. All the doctors, and this is something that is very sad, but happens so much in our supposed healthcare system. When a child transitions, you now have created a patient for life. You will be on hormones for the rest of your life. You will be needing procedures. And so it has become a multi-billion-dollar industry. So doctors will, oh, yeah, okay, you have gender dysphoria. It used to be that It was years of therapy. It was years of everything before anyone would suggest maybe the best course of action for you is to transition.
So,
But yeah, go ahead.
so that was kind of going to be kind of my next question, and I guess kind of point is from my own independent research, on this topic, there does seem to be a lot of money, in this, which I don't want to make assumptions, but you're kind of confirming what I've thought for a while, which is that the reason why this whole thing is getting, accepted kind of by the left and even in the medical field is because there is a lot of money and, organs there is a lot of like organized, financing and pressure, out of this whole, I don't know if you want to call it an industry, but that's kind of what it seems to be.
I think you're right. I and then we'll get back to my awakening story, but this sort of reminded me. Since
Sure.
I've been awake, I have two things I say to people: question everything and follow the money. Figure out who paid for it, who got the money, and who
Yep.
benefits from it. And in this case, you are talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry. That doesn't mean individual doctors are doing this because they make a lot of money at it. What it means is that the medical establishment has followed the standards of care which allow for that to happen. I think it's been a little eye-opening to me when was looking at this. I realized that almost 20% of our gross domestic product is healthcare. Um,
Whoa.
I think it's 17.9%. So almost $1 in $5 that our country generates. And I don't even think that captures all of what I would call healthcare, but that's what the statistics say. One out of five, almost $1 out of $5. So what would happen if people got healthy to our economy? What would happen if, to all of that industry? And a very large portion of that spending is actually tax dollars spent through
Yeah.
Medicare, Medicaid, and now the Obamacare insurance subsidies. So following the money leads you to some really interesting places. But I think in this instance, the money does have a decent amount to do with why we find ourselves where we do with that.
Yeah. Well, and could I just share a kind of as my, you know, from my perspective as, as an individual with disabilities, it's very frustrating to me and to other people I've talked to with disabilities that, right, I have cerebral palsy. This is a lifelong thing. It is what it is. I've done a lot of alternative treatments, which is why I'm doing so well. Because my mom is a huge outside box thinker, but there is a percentage of people with legitimate disabilities who do need assistance and who do need healthcare. But it seems like, especially within the last 5 to 10 years, there are things like transgender surgeries being covered, through, Medicaid and whatnot, and that are kind of like, well, hold on, I might need a new wheelchair, but you're telling me that I can't get approved for that, but someone, who just wants a cosmetic surgery, they're going to get approved for something that costs like 5 times what a manual, wheelchair might cost or something like that. It's bizarre, and I think a lot of people with disabilities are kind of frustrated by that.
Which is perfectly understandable. And, I obviously agree. There are, you know,
And we're back, folks. Sorry for the little technical hiccup there. Yeah, Lisa, As you were saying, we were discussing there's lots of money in this whole healthcare industry, particularly around, uh, you know, transgenderism and Medicare and Medicaid, it seems.
I think it's mostly Medicaid, but yes, I think that there is, and then in private insurance as well. So I think that that plays a big part in it. There are entire clinics and entire wings of institutions set up just for gender for gender. I think it's important to note that there has never been a long-term study on what puberty blockers do to young people, and there's never been any long-term studies about cross-sex hormones either. What do they do physically? Especially there are none about what they actually do emotionally to people. When I was doing the research for the book Deprogramming Democrats, there also is they never did any long-term studies, especially around the mental health and emotional impact of women taking birth control pills.
Right. Do
And you
you
might ask, why are so many women my age or younger than my age on SSRIs and depressed? Well, maybe they're hormonally imbalanced from taking hormones their entire life, but we don't have that conversation. So
Well, there seem to be a lot of, just like I'm 30, so I'm like a late millennial slash like early Gen Z. I don't know quite how the demographics, I'm kind of right in the middle, but what's interesting is when I was in college, I've never been on SSRIs or any sort of medication, for that type of thing, which I don't mean that as a brag, but I'm very happy about that. And yet, I remember there were a few times where I would go to my primary care doctor for a checkup. And there was one instance where, I was in the middle of midterms for college, and my doctor asked me, how are you feeling? And I was like, well, I'm stressed out because of, midterms and exams and whatnot. And he started to just write a script for something. And I asked him, what are you doing? And he said, well, if you're stressed, this might help. I said, well, I appreciate it, but you know, I'm not I'm not excessively stressed. It's just that, the nature of college can be stressful. And I just find that very interesting how now, like, students and everyone are just prescribed like Adderall and SSRIs just for getting, through daily stuff. And, meanwhile, like, even with my, disability, it seems like, I'm a lot more emotionally competent than some people out there. And it just kind of boggles my mind how many people are just on all these medications just to get through the day to day. Kind of scary.
I agree with you 100%, and I think I'm very happy that Secretary Kennedy is looking into some of this over medicalization and over prescription of our children. And I think there are some things that I think are going on that make it hard that doctors are not going to really be able to address. You know, I basically ever since what happened with my mom happened and what happened with my dad happened, and especially since COVID. But unless I'm in a traumatic accident, I likely will not go see a doctor because the very first thing they do is push pills at you, and
Yep.
it's not about and it's not necessarily their fault 100%. I think there's a lot of things about the medical establishment that need to be addressed, but most Americans would rather I don't want to hear about all my lifestyle changes I could make. Just give me a pill and so I feel better.
Yeah.
Um, it's eating right, exercising, dealing with stress, doing all of those things is a lot harder than taking a pill. But the truth is that chances are you take one pill, you're going to need another pill to deal with the side effects of that pill. Most people who go on medication don't ever, they just keep getting more and more. So um, I think, I think, but what I wanted to say about that is that I think that we, as I was saying before, we're very connected in some ways online. I grew up entirely without technology. I did not get an email account or a computer till I was in college.
Right.
And I think that our technology based interactions can be quite shallow for people in some ways, and that we don't have the same kind of sense of community that we used to have.
Right.
People have online communities, but people don't have, they don't have their church that they go to as much, and the church organization or the civic organization, or they don't do 4-H and all of these kind of things, that go to the bowling league or whatever it was that people used to do. But I think that that lack of community and that lack of connection creates a lot of mental health challenges, especially for young people who are now these days, Sam, I think practically born with a tablet in their hands.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things is like I was born in 95, so I grew up with, some technology, but even I was just talking with a friend about this the other day. Even us, in our early 30s, like there was there was technology and there was social media early on, but it wasn't as pervasive as it is now because you still had to log on to a computer or something to, access your Facebook feed or something. It wasn't in your pocket all the time like it is now. Even now, like I try to at least, once a week just, turn on like do not disturb and just kind of turn off all the notifications if I can because uh I think we're just bombarded with so much information in general. It's information overload. The 24-hour news cycle is just like that's what it's literally become now. It's nonstop. And I think from my perspective, that hasn't helped mental health either. We're just being bombarded with the worst possible things ever, too.
I 100% agree with you. And, I talk in the book about deprogramming yourself. One of the things I highly recommend is put your technology down and go outside, get some sun, touch the
Yeah.
grass, reconnect with nature, and leave all of that aside, because we are in a almost like a constant state of fight or flight, high cortisol. And there's now good scientific evidence that shows that with social media, your notifications, TikTok, and algorithms, it is a dopamine hit every time your phone dings. It is like
Yeah.
the same thing that happens in your brain that happens with drugs. And we have very addicted young people especially, but I think I will admit that I have a screen addiction myself,
Oh, yeah, me too.
so I do my best to put it down, but I do think that it contributes to, it's like we're more connected than ever, but we're more isolated than ever at the same time. So
Yeah.
making sure you actually like see your friends in person every once in a while and go, break bread with them, eat a meal or whatever, so that you actually put the phone down. My partner and I, Jamie and I, we live on a farm. So when we go into town, sometimes we'll just leave our phones at home. We're just like, we don't need it. We're together. Nothing is going to happen that's so earth shattering that we need to know. I wonder how many people could actually do that and not feel anxious about not having their phone in their pocket. And that says a lot, about what it's doing to us energetically and emotionally, these phones.
Well, one thing I tend to do is like I go outside and I keep my phone on me just because of the music, but like I'll turn on do not disturb and just listen to, you know, music for like an hour or something or an audiobook or something. I think the notifications, at least for me, was a big thing. When Charlie Kirk passed, like I had to turn off like all the notifications just because like I have friends who worked for, him, and so I was just getting bombarded nonstop with all, that when that broke, it was just crazy.
Yeah, I can see that. But I think this is something that we as a society haven't really, I don't even think, tried to address or even talk about much. It's just
Yeah.
technology happened and we just accepted it and didn't think about what is the actual impact that this is having on people, and what if anything do we need to address it. And I think COVID pushed people really far into their technology when the lockdowns happened. You didn't really have
Yeah.
any other choice, right? So, and I think
Yeah.
we went way farther into that addiction rabbit hole with
Well,
technology than we were before COVID.
so I apologize that it's kind of taken so long to get here, but that's kind of a good segue. You mentioned in your initial email to me and another post that COVID was kind of your uh final, I guess, wake up moment that, you had already started to see some cracks, but what was it about COVID that flipped the switch for you?
So it was really two things. When COVID first came, I bought it. I was scared like everybody was supposed to be, and I bought masks, which I ended up not really wearing, but I had them. And there were really two things that happened. One is that a lot of the advice they were giving didn't match up with what I had learned when I did all that research for my mom. This is why I told that story earlier about my mom and her cancer. Is that so? First of all, if you remember back, so I had become disillusioned with DC and decided to retire. And I had scheduled my retire for March 31st of 2020. And if you remember that, we were just at the end of sort of 2 weeks to flatten the curve when that
Yep.
happened. And if you remember at the very beginning of COVID, they told you couldn't really leave your house unless you were an essential worker. During that 2 weeks, nobody goes out. Police would pull you over, ask you, at least in DC where I lived, why are you out here? You don't belong out here. And even if you had like a backyard that no one else could come into, you weren't supposed to go outside. Vitamin D is just about the best thing you can do for yourself to keep yourself healthy, right?
Yeah.
Sun is the best source of vitamin D. And they were telling you couldn't go out and get any sun. And so this was not making any sense to me. And then, the 6 foot social distancing recommendation came out, and I was like, from a common sense perspective, it kind of makes sense that maybe if you're not close to someone, it's harder to catch something, right? But
Yeah.
I went to look for the science and found out, guess what? There was none. And so I was just kind of going, what in the heck is going on here? We're shutting down the entire world with absolutely no conversation about whether or not it makes sense to do that. And at the same time, I started to see some of the natural health practitioners that I started following after I did the research for my mom get censored. And that
Yeah.
censorship really woke me up, because I'm a First Amendment absolutist. I believe that the First Amendment is what keeps us free to the extent that we are in this country free. It keeps us there. And if we lose those First Amendment rights, because it's not just about freedom of speech. It's freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of religion, all wrapped in that First Amendment. And they started to just completely eviscerate those rights without even a public conversation of it. And I couldn't find the data and the evidence to support it. And I started seeing things like, well, why is Walmart open, but the local mom and pop shop is closed? How does that make
Yeah.
sense from a public health perspective? It makes a lot of sense if you want to destroy all these people's businesses, which 200,000 extra businesses got closed down during the COVID lockdowns. And it makes a lot of sense if you're just trying to keep people afraid and make them sick. It doesn't make any sense from a public health perspective. And, then there were just all sorts of things that just really didn't add up. And then my partner, Jamie, who was my boyfriend at the time, he didn't buy the COVID narrative at first, and he and I were verbally sparring about it, going back and forth. And At one point I said to him, Jamie, I just can't believe it. I can't believe these agencies that I worked with over all these 20 years and the people that I worked with. I can't believe they would do this to us, to the world, without data and evidence. And he looked me in the eyes and he said, Lisa, if they'll poison our water, what won't they do? And I already believe that they were poisoning our water with fluoride. There's all sorts of things in our water system, including fluoride, that I thought was bad for us. Water's the most essential thing we have. If we don't get it, we will die pretty quickly. So my brain could not think its way out of that. My brain could not figure out a way that I could believe that they were poisoning our water, but they wouldn't be doing something else to us that wasn't in our best interest. So, and then he said, if you don't believe me, Lisa, prove me wrong. I may have yelled this at him. I might have said, fine, I will. And then I started doing research. I started doing research with an open mind. I started doing research looking at sources that before I would have disregarded because they weren't experts. And also, most importantly, maybe doing research that wasn't just on Google because of the algorithms. They'll hide stuff from you.
Oh, yeah.
And I started going, as they say, down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, and my entire reality disappeared. Everything I believed was not true, and I really woke up. So that was my wake up moment, and that was when I really started to see how brainwashed people on the left were, how idolizing the expert, not being able to actually question what experts tell us is one of the ways that people were getting controlled on the left. And you can see that with Anthony Fauci and COVID all over the place, right?
Yeah. When he said I am the science in that one hearing, like that was very egotistical. Like I know a lot of scientists who I respect, they would have never said anything, like that. Science is an objective, process, or at least it should be.
Yeah, and
for that sort of thing.
Agree with you 100%, Sam, and I even have that quote in there in my book, I Am the Science, because it proves a point. And I think one of the things that my eyes were really open to is that what passes as science in our country is nothing like what the scientific method prescribes. It is not in any way science anymore. And again, I would encourage people, if you're asking questions about any scientific matter, to follow the money. Like a true scientist should have no vested interest in the outcome of his or her experiment. They should have, here's my hypothesis, I'm going to test it. If the data and evidence and the tests support my hypothesis, then I'll run the tests a few more times to make sure it replicates, and then I will go, Eureka! I have a hypothesis, and I would publish that. But what happens most of the time is that someone who has a great deal of money at stake pays for a study, and if the study doesn't get the results they want, they bury it, and then they do another study to try to get the results they want. Big Pharma pays for almost all of the studies about Big Pharma, and so on. Anytime I hear a statement like the science is settled, that is not science. Science is never settled. The scientific method tells us what hypothesis is most likely true based on the data and evidence we have available at the time.
Right.
I mean, we don't believe that the sun revolves around the earth anymore because that new data and evidence was found that shows us no, actually it's the opposite, right? And so this got me to question a lot of our science. And then when you find out, for example, the FDA, like half of their budget comes from drug approval fees, and then that a lot of scientists, quote unquote scientists who work for the government, get to take royalties from certain things, that patents, it starts raising a lot of questions about the process for you.
Yeah. Well, and then you get you get people like Joe Rogan, who used to be, more liberal. He was asking questions about COVID, and he took ivermectin when he got COVID, and that was previously like hailed as, I wouldn't say a miracle cure, but ivermectin has been applied for various uses. And all of a sudden, he and anyone else who used ivermectin was labeled as like some sort of crazy kook and conspiracy theorist. And my hypothesis is, if more people are taking ivermectin for COVID, like I did, there wouldn't be as much money in the for the pharmaceuticals or whatever. So
I mean, I definitely think that's part of it, but the other thing that is true is that if ivermectin was recognized as an effective treatment for COVID, they could not have ever gotten the emergency use authorization for the mRNA shots, because part of a requirement in the law for that emergency use of what they call a vaccine, but I don't see it as a vaccine because it doesn't stop transmission or infection. You can't have an emergency use authorization if there is an effective treatment available. So that was part of it as well, I believe, in that particular instance. So I think, yeah, science, I think a lot of people lost a lot of faith in our medical agencies and institutions, during COVID. And I didn't have a lot of faith in them because of what happened with my mom, and it certainly got worse during the COVID
yeah,
lockdowns.
yeah. I mean, have you encountered like other individuals in your circle who were you know former formerly on the left and then had this awakening? Because I mean, I have, and like I wouldn't say I'm, some people would say I'm a die in the wool conservative, but like even a lot of my more liberal friends, some of them who were formerly on the left, they're starting to sound a lot more like me, or like a Rush Limbaugh type, just for questioning the liberal narratives about health now.
Um, I think there are a lot of people, yeah, that have been waking up. I think COVID woke a lot of people up. I will say that the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk, and then the left's reaction to it, also woke a lot more people up as well, Sam. And so I think there are a lot of people waking up, and I think that that's a great thing. I hope that it continues. I do worry that a lot of the people who may still be asleep are going to be a lot harder to wake up at this point. If I'll just say this, and I do need to wrap up soon, unfortunately,
Yeah.
but that if COVID and the straight out lies that we were told during COVID, 4 years of an administration where it's very hard for someone to say that we had an actual president who was running our country. And then what happened with Charlie Kirk did not wake people up. They may be very hard to wake up, at this point.
Yeah. I mean, even I was kind of a little shocked that like people on the left were outright cheering Charlie's death, like not even doing it anonymously, like online. Like that, that kind of used to be the thing that you would get, trolls online who would hide, behind accounts. But no, people are just doing it out in the open, and that was shocking even for me to, see. And the other thing is, like, I'm only a year younger than Charlie is, um, so yeah, that's frightening.
Yeah, and it was very, I guess in some ways I am not as surprised. I wasn't as surprised about it just because things have gotten so the people on the left think they're morally superior. They
Yeah,
literally like this hurts me, not like emotionally, but this scares me actually, that people on the left believe that language when other people use it against vulnerable populations is actually violence. Okay. It's
Yeah.
literal violence. And because Charlie had been so vilified and his position so misconstrued in many ways through mainstream media and social media clips of him saying things which he did say, but the context makes it very different, that he was committing violence and putting vulnerable people at risk so that his
Yeah.
death was justified. And while it was very sad for me to see, it was also in some ways not surprising given where many on the left find themselves. And I think what the left also learned is that your speech, your right to say those kind of things is protected by our First Amendment from our government infringing on them, but you are not protected from the consequences of what you say. And
Right.
if your employer decides that what you said paints their company in a bad light, they have every right to fire you because of it.
Yeah, well, the other thing I've noticed too is, you mentioned that the left loves all these, protected groups, but as soon as these protected groups, go off the, disagree with the left-wing orthodoxy, then suddenly, it doesn't matter that I'm in a wheelchair or that my friend, is African American or something. If you disagree with us, then you're persona non grata. So,
Well, and that's because I think, they mostly listen to the experts, repeat the talking points. But if you push them at all on any of these positions, there's not any depth underneath it. So they can't really have the conversation with you because, like I saw at these No Kings rallies, a bunch of interviews, and they'd be asked, "Well, why do you think Donald Trump has violated the Constitution? Can you be very specific about what he's violated?" And none of them can. And so
right.
that's why they don't want to have the conversation because they can repeat the talking points, but there's no there underneath it. You know what I mean? So that's also why I sadly think it may be hard to wake anybody up at this point. But I don't think it's hopeless, but I think it's going to be a lot harder for people to wake up if they haven't over the past 5 or 6 years than it
No, I
would
mean,
was before.
my attitude is I always try to look at life uh as the glass is half full. That's always been my approach, and so yeah, things are really scary, but I for one am an optimist and a glass half full type of guy, which is why I was really interested in having you on, because I think what you're trying to do with your book is really encouraging.
100%. And I remain optimistic too.
Yeah.
I think we're reaching a critical mass of people who see beyond the red versus blue, black versus white, women versus men, trans versus not, the divide and conquer they've been pushing us towards, and will reunite around the things we have in common, which are a lot as humans, as well as many of our belief in the great country that we live in, and will rally together to reclaim the power of we the people and stop our government from doing things in our name that we don't agree with.
I think that's very well said. Well, Lisa, I want to thank you for your time. And also, where can people find your book and where can people reach out to you if they're interested in having a discussion with you?
You can find my book on Amazon and also Barnes and Noble, and then you can get in touch with me through my website, deprogrammingdemocrats.com. I am also deprogrammed dem on X.
Lisa, I really appreciate your time today, and I would love to have you back on at some point. This is a very interesting, thing that you're doing, and I wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam, and it would be my pleasure to come back. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, yeah. Folks, thank you for tuning in, and I will see you on Wednesday night for the live show, 10 p.m. Eastern, here on YouTube and Rumble. So thank you for tuning in, and God bless.
The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Thank you for watching the Whitfield Report live on the Right to Offend Media Network. Make sure to check out Sam's books on Amazon, Audible, and Kindle. You can follow Sam on X at SamW_NGC and the Right to Offend Media Network at RTO Media. Like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. And until next time, God bless, God save this great nation. God, freedom, legacy, in that order.